together on trying to make a determination of whether you're a farm or a processor or both. So you might want to take a look at that. It's going to deal now with issues that are now considered manufacturing or processing, which would include activities that are often conducted on a farm, which include packing and holding. So in certain contexts, this might be a farm activity or it might be a processing activity. Again, I'm not going to get into that in a lot of detail, but wanted to make sure that you're aware that you may be under both of these rules or one or the other. With FSMA, we do have some major changes coming for farm activities. The major one is that you have to have a plan for controlling microbes of public health significance. This isn't just pathogens, it's other things now like generic E. coli that we're talking about here, because that's going to be an indicator of water quality for you. And if you're not controlling a pathogen yourself with your farm activities, your processing activities, you have to be able to tell or know who in the value chain is doing that. So if you're selling raw product to a processor who turns it into juice, you could say, well, geez, I didn't treat this product to kill bacteria, but I'm selling it to somebody who is. Or if you're selling it to someone who's freezing, then you'd have to mark your product saying that neither I nor my customer are inactivating bacteria of public health significance. So there might be some other control measures that have to go in place, or you're going to have to follow that product one more step down the value chain to the person that is actually doing that control, and then have documentation for those sorts of things. Major issue now with staff training, so you're going to have annual training on food safety for your staff that are working on the farm, and this includes all of your seasonal workers. Environmental testing for agricultural water, that's what the focus of today's presentation is, and then more records. Lots of records, and most of these records are going to be things you're going to have to keep for at least 2 years. When we get further on with our water quality testing discussion here, you'll see that the testing is going to be done annually on a rolling basis. So you'll set up your initial water quality profile, and then every year you'll add to the back end of that, and then you can take the first years off. So we're on about a 4-5 year rolling average on that. If you're processing, there's some new changes here in the rule you're going to need to be concerned about that the agency never really cared about before. Maybe they cared about it, but they didn't put it in a regulation. And one of those is the condition of the facility. So if you have a brand new facility that's very well zoned and easy to clean, that'll be considered lower risk than an older facility that's more difficult to clean. We have to worry about allergens. And I know for most of people here that are working with berries, allergen is not a concern, but there is always a possibility that there could be some type of compound that's used as or material that's used as a soil conditioner that could be allergenic, for example, almond shells. So if that gets in with your product, then now you've got an allergen issue. And then control of undesirable microbes, and then a number of other hazards that we have to specifically deal with in our food protection plans, like radiological hazards. This is all very new. This is for processed foods, not for raw agricultural products, but just to bring that to your attention. And then everyone who's a processor is going to have a written preventive controls program. This is going to be the basis for their food protection plan, along with written recalls. Another change here is requirement for preventive control qualified individual. This is training that we're giving at the university, both in in-person classes and also online. Also approved processes that you would develop for your suppliers. And this would include suppliers of anything that would come into or onto a crop or that might be incorporated into it, and packaging. So here again for everyone here who's working primarily with berries, I would imagine, which is a produce item that's eaten raw. So it would be covered under 112 as part of a covered produce item. Here are the issues that we're concerned about. Quality of the agricultural water, biological soil amendments. There's a new comment period open for the use of uncomposted biological materials that might be used as fertilizers or soil conditioners. For example, I know people here might use separated solids that are not composted. If you have issues with this and how the product might be used, or what type of regulations you would like to see in regards to the use of dairy manure, take a look at the FDA website and put your comments in, because there's a comment period open now for probably the next 50 days on use of dairy manure. So take a look at that and make some comments on it. Wild animal control, worker training, hygiene, equipment, tools, buildings, instruments, these sorts of things, specific new requirements for records primarily on this, and then some exemptions, mostly for small processors. So here we're looking at produce, and then any produce that's sold raw would be covered under Part 112. And here again, we'll look now at some of the issues tied with water. So all of the water that's used that comes into contact with the product or in irrigation has to be of suitable sanitary quality for its intended use. And what we're going to see is that there are two separate criteria here for water. But for the water quality that has to be the highest are going to be water that comes into contact with our raw agricultural products or our covered produce. And here are some of the things that we're concerned about here. Any water that's used for sprays. This is something you may forget about. And then activities associated with harvest, packaging, and holding activities, including any water that's used for washing or cooling product or comes into contact with hands or food contact surfaces. Also, water that's used to prevent dehydration has to meet pretty strict water quality standards. So for the water quality to be adequate, it has to be managed using good public health practices, and we have to have ways to ensure that the water has low microbiological levels so that it isn't a source of illness. And the water quality for direct water application onto our crops or food contact surfaces has the highest criteria applied to it. And we have criteria too for both ground and surface water. You're going to find that these are a little bit different. So we're starting to see a morph in the definition of surface water based on some of the actions from the EPA recently. So the EPA has quite recently tried to expand the scope of what a navigable water is in the United States to include what would ordinarily be considered dry channels and land that's adjacent to a wetland. There's been some pushback on that. I think the FDA is not going to consider those types of water sources being surface water, but they're also not going to be of the water quality in a temporary pool of water is probably not going to be one you're going to want to be using for irrigation anyway. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention that we're looking here at surface water being restricted to something that would have a formed, fairly consistent geographical feature to it. So what we have to do now for agricultural water is every year a farmer is going to have to examine the water source, water distribution system, and pooling of water that might occur on a property at the beginning of the growing season and then any other time that might be appropriate during the course of the growing season to make sure that the water that's coming into contact with the crop is going to be of high enough quality, and you're going to know when the quality of that water might be changing because of either its appearance or because of testing that you're doing with it. So we have to be able to identify any condition that's associated with that water that could introduce a hazard that might make the product or a food contact surface unsafe. And here are some of the things they want you to look at. If you're working with a water that comes directly into contact with the food, we're looking at an presence of generic E. coli, an indication of fecal contamination. That is going to have to be 0. So if the product is that the water's coming in direct contact with the food or to hands, other food contact surfaces, or whatever. And we're going to have a testing program to be able to show that. If you do have water coming in direct contact with the product that is generic E. coli positive, you have to immediately discontinue using that water, then take some type of corrective action. That could be going to use of another water source, or it could be treating that water. In any case, the FDA has made the decision that untreated surface water is never going to be appropriate for application directly to a crop. For other growing activities like irrigation water, there are numeric criteria, and this is why I showed you that chart, that Excel worksheet, because this calculation gets to be a little bit tricky. But there are some standards here. One is a geometric mean, and the other is a statistical threshold value that you're going to want to determine for your irrigation water. And there are some testing protocols for that as well. See if I can get to that. So the goal that the FDA has for promulgating this part of the regulation is to make sure that people understand what the microbiological quality of the water is that you're using for irrigation over time, and then determine a long-term strategy for managing a water source to make sure that the water that's coming into contact with crops is safe. So this is the site, but I know that Chris is also going to be sending out this Excel worksheet to everyone. I think the presentation is also going to be posted on the extension website as well, so you could find this link there in addition to that. The reason the FDA came up with this particular testing scheme is they felt that it would provide the greatest amount of flexibility based on the technology that they currently have available for determining water quality. And with this STV value, that is going to take into account some fluctuation that you would normally expect to occur over the course of a season. One of the things that we do have now with these agricultural water quality provisions is the ability for die-off. This wasn't in the proposed rule, but it came into the final rule. So if your water doesn't meet the criteria, you still have to take corrective actions prior to the next crop year to try to fix that. But you do have an option here to try to ensure that the produce that you're making is going to be safe. If you can show that the generic E. coli that would have been present in that water that got onto the crop is going to die off and be at a safe level within 4 days between your last irrigation and time of harvest, or between the end of harvest season and end of storage. So this last provision was primarily for onion growers. This is something that they'll do. They'll take the onions out of the ground and they'll leave them on the soil to cure for a number of days. And we found that treatment, the ultraviolet radiation from the sun, will be sufficient to kill E. coli, for example, and that would make the product safe and get the microbiological quality down to the level that the FDA would like to see. So we can also look at washing, and we can also look at treating the water as a way of meeting these criteria. If you're going to treat the water, if that's what you choose to do, you have to use an EPA-registered antimicrobial pesticide product or some other suitable method. So this would allow for the use of something like ultraviolet radiation or potentially ozonation. Whether that's considered to be a physical or chemical treatment is sort of up for grabs in some circles, but there is some flexibility here to do that. But you have to be able to monitor that system to ensure that the treated water is consistently safe, and I know some of our speakers here today are going to look at that. I also believe that there are some filtration systems that are sufficient for removing microbes, at least to some extent. And so a combination of a physical and a chemical treatment would be appropriate. But again, you have to have a program in place to be able to monitor these things. So what happens if your water quality drops? Well, you're going to have to re-inspect your entire agricultural water system and try to figure out where what might have changed to cause that water quality to drop, and where the hazards might have been introduced into the system, and then make necessary changes. But more importantly, you're going to have to go back and start your sampling system all over again. So if you were looking at 20 samples at the beginning of the year, you're now going to have to go and do 20 samples again. Ensure that these are representative of your existing water quality based on the time and place where you're going to take those samples, and reestablish your water quality profile. So the frequency of testing here is going to depend in part on your water source. So if you're working with untreated surface water, this is going to be considered the most vulnerable. you're going to need to do an initial survey of at least 20 samples collected as close as practicable to harvest over the course of 2 to 4 years. I don't know about you, but this is both overly prescriptive and ineffective at the same time. So if it was me, I would actually come up with a sampling scheme that you think is going to be representative of what you're doing, so that you're going to be able to take a stand and know that that water is safe, at least to the extent that you possibly can. And then after you do your initial survey, at least 5 samples a year, you're going to have to update that, and this is going to be on a rolling cycle. Now, if you find out that you're doing the scheme, you're doing some intermediate water testing, and you find that your water quality is not up to snuff, you're going to have to start all over again, take 20 more samples, and proceed on that basis. If you're using untreated groundwater, the sampling is significantly less, going from 20 samples to 4 samples. And again, they're looking at least an annual sample rate of 1. And again, on a rolling cycle here. So if your test fails, you have to resume testing of at least 4 times per growing season or year. Again, they're looking for no detectable generic E. coli. If you're pulling your water out of a municipal supply system, you don't have to test it yourself, but you do have to have the public water systems test results, and you're going to have to store those. Everybody who's processing knows you already have to have a monthly water report in your files, and so this is a similar requirement. You can also treat the municipal water if you want to. That's always an option. So who's going to do this test? Well, you can do them yourself. You can have somebody come and do the sampling for you on your behalf. And the issue here is they want to make sure that you're aseptically collecting the samples and testing the samples using an appropriate method like the ones that are listed here in 112.151. There are also some options here if your water quality meets the appropriate criteria that you can switch to separate methods or different methods if you can show that they're equally valuable. So how do you know that your water system is up to snuff? Particularly when you're processing or handling, so you've got a flume system or some type of hydrocooler, and you want to make sure that that water is safe for its current use. So you have to establish water change schedules, particularly for recirculating water to avoid contamination. You can use visual monitoring, so look for buildup of organic material such as soil or plant debris within the water treatment system. But I would back this up with sampling as well, so that you would know that when the water looks this turbid that it's probably not good, and then change it. You also have to now monitor the temperature. I know a lot of folks were monitoring visual quality, but temperature might be a new attribute of this. And this is to ensure that the water is not up in a range between, let's say, 25 and 30 degrees, heaven forbid, where a lot of our mesophilic pathogenic microbes might like to grow. We do have issues with records. So there are more records now required with this program. So the first thing is you have to have the findings of your water system inspection. So you're going to have to actually have a chart or a flow chart or diagram of your water system and where you're sampling, and where the water's coming in, where it's going out, if it has different feeds or different outlets, what's happening there. Any of the analytical tests that you've conducted on that, and the scientific data or information you're relying on to support the adequacy of both the analytical method you're using for the water and also your sampling scheme. So this is where I think might need some help from Extension or from other people who could give you some ideas on how best to sample water systems. And then if you're relying on die-off, you're going to have some data to back that up as well. So we have to look here, this is mostly with the die-off again, calculated log reductions. Our annual documentation of our public water system, if you're using that. And if you establish an alternate method, your basis for that, both in terms of sampling and also in terms of the actual analysis that you're looking at. Yes, sir?
When you're talking about applied to the crop, does this mean water that comes in contact with a crop, or does all of this relate to soil applied water?
There's two criteria.
I know there is, but I'm wondering what all this relates to.
It relates to both. So you're going to have to have a water management scheme.
Zero E. coli for soil applied?
No. Zero E. coli only for water that might come in contact with the crop. The GM and the STV, I think of a 210 and a 420 variants. There's some data here for this on that spreadsheet. Your irrigation water can have a certain amount of generic E. coli in it, but it has to fall within a certain range. It has to be under a certain target number. But no. This is the zero E. coli is only for water that come directly in contact with your product. Yeah.
With direct product contact, isn't that more related to washing, food contact surfaces?
Absolutely.
Processing water versus your irrigation water.
Absolutely.
Or anything that's overhead, it's going to come in direct contact?
Anything that overhead cooling is something we're very much concerned about.
Well, what I think he's concerned about is he's got an overhead irrigation system that he's applying for irrigation that's direct contact with product. Is that going to be zero tolerance, which I don't think it was?
Yes, it is, because it's coming in contact with the product. Now, this is going to be a situation where you're going to want to look at that die-off provision. Because if you can show, let's say you have 100 E. coli in the overhead irrigation system. If you can show that between the time you harvest the product and 4 days later, that the level of E. coli, generic E. coli is going to drop by 2 log, then you're going to be okay. So this would be one of the situations where we'd want to look at that die-off provision. And you may find that by exposure to ultraviolet light, you might get that kind of kill, but you might not, in which case then you're probably going to have to treat that water so that you can get that. I'm just picking 2 log kill because I'm thinking that might be a reasonable level of E. coli in overhead irrigation water. Yeah.
So his question, when you have a drip line on the ground,
That's right.
where are the requirements for that?
That's going to be that roughly, what is it? Is it 210? Anybody know? The Merrick guys have it on your slide.
Promise is 127.
What's this?
126.
126. 126. 126 in irrigation water. Then 100 mils. That's okay. Yeah. So if you can meet that criteria, you're all right. Yeah. Does that answer everybody's question there? Yeah. But that's going to be an issue. Any overhead use of water. This was something that was interesting. I thought this was kind of strange when I saw it. This came from a historical database. They sort of derived from the Haynes study, if anybody's heard about that. A bunch of nurses, they've been following their dietary practices for, I don't know, since mid-70s, late 70s, and made a determination that the products that I've got listed here in green are not eaten raw. Okay? And so if you're raising any of the things that are on this list, you don't have to worry about these water quality standards. Now, I don't know about you, but I know of a lot of people that eat sour cherries, sweet corn, dates, dill, figs, mint, and beets raw. I don't personally eat raw asparagus, but I know some people that do. So grains are excluded as well. So, and this is an exhaustive list. If your product is on this list, you can just forget everything I just said. Okay. But it's kind of strange. Winter squash, people eat raw winter squash, raw sweet potatoes. I don't know. Then there are all these people that are into these raw diets. My daughter is one of these crazy. She's an artist in San Francisco, and she thinks everything's great if it's raw and you put it in a blender and drink it. Yeah, okay. At least she's not a vegan anymore. I'm very happy. Okay. And then here's some of the exemptions. Produce, so if you're raising products for your personal use, value is under $25,000. It's going to be commercially processed by somebody who's going to have a kill step. And there are also some qualified exemptions. Example, if you're shipping your product less than 275 miles within state lines, there's an exemption for that, a qualified exemption, these sorts of things. So, but if you're going to be selling off to a commercial operation, you do have to have a validated process at your commercial processing facility. So if you're vertically integrated, or your customer is going to have to be able to send you this documentation that they're doing these sorts of things and killing the bacteria. Freezing does not kill bacteria. So anyone who's freezing pretty much have to consider that you're still making a raw agricultural product. And then have written assurances from that processor. And then if that individual you're selling to, maybe it's a warehouse, is not doing anything to treat that product, you have to find the person further down the value chain that is, and have be able to document that. So I don't know how we're going to be able to do this in the food industry overall, but that's what the regulation says. I think that's going to fall apart a little bit later. And then you have to disclose on your packaging that the food has not been processed to adequately reduce the presence of microorganisms of public health significance. I'm not sure if the agency is going to want everybody who's making a raw product to put this on your cartons or not. We haven't been able to, we've asked this question to their technical advisory network and haven't gotten an answer. But with that, I think I'll stop. If anyone has questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the groundwater, surface water definition that you mentioned earlier, since it ties into the requirements.
Right.
Do you think groundwater is just going to be a straightforward groundwater, or do you see it being something similar to what they use in the state of Washington for drinking water, where if it's a shallow well, it's considered under the influence and has additional requirements, or do you think a well is going to be a well?
In the federal law, my reading is a well is a well, but that doesn't mean the state isn't going to come in with some additional requirements.
And do you have any sense of where something called a ditch involved in this?
A ditch. I think
a federal stream or something that's,
I think it depends on what the ditch is. If the ditch is always there, it's going to be considered a source of surface water. If a ditch is sort of intermittent, there's a kind of a current debate as to whether something that's intermittently dry is or is not a surface water feature. And so the EPA is kind of pushing it to say if there's ever any water in this ditch, then it's a navigable body of, tied to a navigable body of water in the United States. But others are starting to. There's some current challenges now in court over that particular definition. Yeah.
Would it be your understanding if you take a well and you're pumping up groundwater and you pump it into a reservoir and store it there, that's now surface water?
Oh boy, I think it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah.
especially if it's not covered.
Yeah, particularly if it's not covered. Yeah, and then if it is covered, you still have to be concerned about it because I've had guys come and work in my lab and they can grow pathogens in all kinds of, apparently clean water, and opportunistic pathogens too. Yeah.
What about heavy metals in water like arsenic?
Under Part 112, the FDA doesn't care about heavy metals in water. This produce safety rule is only relating to bacteriological quality. Now, there might be some other laws that are concerned about arsenic, but that's not Part 112. But still, if you do have a high enough level of heavy metals on a product, that product would be considered adulterated under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Yeah, but this particular rule doesn't address that. Yeah.
Back to the shallow well, U.S. Springs is considered groundwater there too. And the Department of Ecology and the Department of Health wants to consider those as surface water.
Yeah, I think, unless I made a mistake on this slide, I think I had that under groundwater.
I think that's right.
Yeah, let me see if I find it.
Consider that groundwater.
Let's see. Oh, unless I made a mistake. I hope I didn't make a mistake on this slide. Here we go. Surface water. Yeah. But this groundwater definition is actually taken out of the code. So those would be kind of underground sources of, yeah.
So springs are or aren't, or what's?
Well, when a spring is underground, I think it's groundwater. When it's on the surface, it's surface water. I think it depends on where you take it. Yeah. But as soon as it goes into a standing, yeah. Yeah, isn't that bizarre?
With an artesian spring, you have to catch it just before it comes underground.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what you would have to do, and then you'd be able to consider it groundwater. Yes, sir.
Can you open up your Excel sheet?
Let me see if I can do that. I may have to have Chris find it here if I screwed it up. I might have closed it. Yeah.
Question anymore?
Yeah.
Any other questions while I try to?
Yeah, it was a question about the ultraviolet
Yes.
and kill E. coli.
Yes.
Is that
No. It could be for any type of water. UV is very effective for treating water in a thin sheet or film. And so if you wanted to use that as a treatment method, you could.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
UV lights
Yeah.
for treatment of water. I'm talking about the
Oh,
diet.
yeah. UV,
Crop, you just leave it out in the sun.
That's right.
Kill bacteria.
yeah, absolutely.
4 days.
Yes.
Is that just been tested on like onions or?
Yeah, we actually have some data on that. I think our colleagues at Oregon State did a study on that for the onion growers specifically to see what the die-off would be. I don't think anybody has done experiments with berries to look at, yeah. Yeah, I think here it's going to be kind of hard. Now, we do know that ultraviolet only goes into the surface, only as a surface treatment. So the problem with berries is that UV penetration is only on the order of fractions of a millimeter usually through a fairly thin surface. So you might be able to treat the surface, but if there's something underneath one of those little, what do they call those? Thank you. You're not going to get it.
Does the fact that you peel an onion play into that at all?
Actually, they weren't concerned about that because they were looking at green onions and red onions where people would not necessarily cook them, so they would figure that there might be surface contamination from the peel going in. Yeah. Okay. So this.
So you can go through the calculation part.
Okay. I'll go to this part here.
So you see, I was just going to point out to everybody, you see column F that says log CFU. So when you have your mean that they're going to use on your CFU column E, but that log CFU is what you use to calculate diamond. So that's why that column's there.
So that should.
So yeah, so if you've got a count of 126, it's going to tell you it's a log 10 CFU count, which would be, I use actually, I don't remember. But that will be like a 0.1, so you can use that column to calculate your die-off if you wait 4 days and what the die-off is applied for each day.
And I think they were looking at about 0.5 log per day. So if this number is higher than 2, as far as total counts, then you're in bad shape. You're not going to be able to.
Excel gives you that information that
Yeah.
you use for that die-off.
Yeah.
So you can stop your irrigation and figure out how many days you've got.
And then here's just an example calculation that they did on that first sheet. And their explanation here, it's really, I don't want to bring it up, it's really kind of long and involved, but it's very detailed and it's very good. So I'm happy about that. Let's see what the shelf is. Here's another log here. Yes.
Yeah, you guys will get this probably today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
Any other
Any
questions?
more
for
questions?
Dr. Rasco?
Yes, sir.
Quick question. A lot of times concerns are raised about washing equipment,
Yes.
and that water that's used to wash equipment, is it treated as irrigation water or is it treated differently?
It depends on whether the equipment comes in contact with the product or not, whether it's a food contact surface.
Usually talking about picking machines,
I would presume that that's going to be a food contact surface. Yeah. Yeah. Now the outside, the wheels might not be a food contact surface, but I know that people now are sanitizing forklifts, and they've had to redesign forklifts so that they can deal with, quat-based sanitizers, simply because of this issue. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
Hey,
very
thank
much.
you. Okay, you bet.